Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Afterlife podcast. This is your host Pooja Chilikuri. My guest today is Heather Tesch. Heather is also the
Hello.
host of Beyond with Heather Tesch. It's a podcast that I certainly have been following and I highly recommend if you're interested and curious about this topic of near-death experiences. In each episode, Heather talks with those who've been on the other side through a near-death experience or an NDE, and they describe what they felt and experienced. Heather is very, very awesome in her style and how she asks questions, which is what drew me to her show. And she makes sure that her guests bring out these stories in a way that impacts her audiences. Heather has spent more than 30 years working as an on camera meteorologist and journalist, most notably with the Weather Channel. And she is joining us today to share with us her story and some of the things that have inspired her during this journey that she's had with her podcast. So, welcome to the show, Heather.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me on, Pooja. It is such an honor to be here.
It is an honor for me to be able to be on the other side, Heather, and ask you some questions. And I just want everybody to know that it was a real joy for me to meet Heather at this conference that we were both attending, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And Heather willingly accepted my offer to interview her. So it's your turn today, Heather, to share your story.
Well, I am thrilled to do it. It was so great meeting you. And I think that's the wonderful thing about IANS is we get the opportunity to actually meet people that are interested in the same types of things in person. And it really was just a blessing to kind of bump into you and to be able to chat for a little bit and then to have me on your show. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah. And, and I would love for you to just start us off with your journey of being a weather person, and then now you're behind the mic interviewing folks that have had NDEs. So, what was that journey for you?
It seems, a little odd because, they seem like they're very different things. But if you think about it, both of them are really exploring, when you're a meteorologist, a scientist, you're kind of exploring, the aspects of the weather, of science. And here we're exploring spiritual experiences. And so that they are a little different, but I've always, always been interested in spiritual things, in near-death experiences. And this kind of happened because after 30 years of doing a job that I loved and with people that I love and with some great companies, I was ready for change. I was ready to do something on my own. And I was ready to explore more of my passion. I had spent a lot of time learning about science and meteorology, which was fascinating. But I also had this passion about spirituality, about what comes next, what is our purpose. And so I kind of got to the point in my life where I was ready to jump into it. There were opportunities now with podcasts that there certainly weren't when I started in this business. People are more open to wanting to hear more about this. So, so it's just been an incredible journey for me. And it felt very natural to me, even though it seems a little odd. And, all along the way, as I was studying weather and as initially I have a journalism degree, then I went back to school for meteorology. And then I, was certainly immersed in the field all along the way. I've been looking at near-death experiences. In fact, my very first college paper was on near-death experiences.
So, you always were curious about near-death experiences then?
Yes.
Yeah.
Always was curious. Certainly I hadn't heard about them when I was young, but I was always really intrigued just with what was out there. I was very curious to know more about the purpose of life and even as a little kid, which seems a little different, but it's not like I went around doing that. I still played all the normal things that kids played and did all that. And but it's something on the side as I got older and I could read books. I remember reading even things like hypnosis because I was really fascinated by the brain and in a way how your thoughts can create your reality, which is kind of a connected thing to, um, you know, what we're all about, that sort of thing. And then when the first book I found on near-death experiences, it was Betty Eadie's, and I loved it. And I think that really set me on a journey my whole life where I've been enjoying um, reading about this, and more recently in recent years watching these stories. It's been fascinating, and now I get the opportunity to share these stories with other people, and it's really been fun to do. And it's great that I can ask questions, that I can, all the things that when I'd heard them tell it, I'm like, oh, but what about this, or what about this? And so I can finally dig in and then ask them a few more things that I've been curious about.
Yeah, and thank you, because there's so many of us that are curious. The afterlife conversations, it's not like your everyday dinner dinner topic.
No.
No.
And that's why a lot of us rely on podcasts like yours, like mine, for some of these topics, because we don't always have a group of people we hang out with that are into the same things. Just like my husband might like to play golf or occasionally watch golf on TV. I mean, I might sit down and watch it with them, but I'm never going to turn on the TV and just on my own watch golf. It's just not my interest. And so I don't expect people around me to have this interest, but it's really neat when I can connect to people like you and connect with your audience, because, this is our way of getting together with our people.
Yes, absolutely. I was just
Yeah.
thinking that, I live in a neighborhood, I think there's like 200 homes. And if I
Mhm.
were to knock on every door and try to find out, like, is there anybody here that's died and come back? Like, how many people would say yes, right?
Right. They'd all kind of go, sorry, and close the door on you.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
probably think I'm a nut.
Yes, yes, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And what's fortunate now is this is becoming a bit more mainstream and more people are curious about it. But when I first started reading these, it's still kind of a little out there for a lot of people, and it probably still is.
Yeah.
And but it's nice that we're growing a community of people that are really intrigued by this.
Yes.
Mhm.
And even from listening to your podcast or interviewing some folks,
Yeah.
each story is so different of
Yes.
someone that's
Yes.
been on the other side, and they come out with a completely unique experience. But I have a question for you. Do you
Yes.
find any common themes when you're talking to your guests? Their
Mhm.
stories are vastly different, but do you find any common themes that they're saying, that you're noticing patterns?
Absolutely. The common theme of every guest I've interviewed, and really virtually all of the ones I've heard, with maybe a couple of exceptions, it's about love. It's
Mm,
always about love. Love is what's most important. I think that, many of them say that we are here to learn. And one of the things that we are here to learn is how to love.
mhm.
And so I think that that theme of love going along with it is kindness and empathy. And and so despite all the differences, and there are very big differences, and I think part of that is cultural. What I think sometimes these near-death experiences are aimed for certain people and what would connect with them. But despite all those differences, they do share that common theme
Mhm.
of love, and that's what people tend to lead with when they're talking about it.
Yeah, and that's so beautiful to me personally, Heather, because
Mhm.
I have had a very difficult journey with religion. And a
Yeah,
lot of times, where things get very dogmatic, there's a lot of fear for the afterlife.
there
And, I
is.
just wanted to get your take on that with interviewing all these people. Did you ever find that people felt judged or afraid, or, any of those things that we associate? Um, yeah.
Well, I know exactly what you're saying because there is a lot of fear in some traditional religions, and the more I study these, the more I see it's really about love. Now, there were some that I've heard that people have shared that were more of what we would consider a hellish experience.
Mhm.
But I think once you listen to a lot of them, even that kind of fits into the picture. And it seems like I haven't heard a ton, but the people that have had them, needed to have them as kind of a wake-up call.
Mhm.
And it's always been somebody who described themselves as very arrogant, which I find is interesting, that that was kind of a common theme.
Mhm.
Typically, they were an atheist, but it was because they were arrogant that they, wanted nothing to do with God, which I've heard atheists, that have had beautiful experiences. So I think it's more of that combination that includes um, somebody being very arrogant. And in those cases, they did experience some very negative things. But the other thing that the ones that I have talked to, what's interesting is they heard a voice saying, call out or something. The voice was basically telling them, to call out to God.
Mhm.
Um, and when they did that, they were taken out of that bad experience. And sometimes people also end up in this very dark place that has generally been referred to as the void. And now
Mhm.
some people find it very comforting,
Yeah.
and some people find that scary. But the people that are in it, they typically say they either saw a pinprick light that they focused on, or they even asked to see, the light, or they asked to see Jesus, or they asked to see God. And then once they ask for something, they were shown it. And I recently had a guest on that said, I realize now that when you're over there, you can ask for things. You don't have to just, have it happen to you. My recommendation would be to always ask for the light, look for the light. And I think when you seek it, then that's when you're going to have that come into your experience.
That is beautiful. And also, it just makes me think how much power we have. And
Yes.
you
Mhm.
alluded to it earlier about creating our realities. So thank you for
Yes.
sharing that, Heather, because that's a very difficult one. Sometimes even with the best of stories, to sort through the distressing ones and to try to make sense of it.
It's very scary for people when they hear them. And I do think there are some negative ones out there that I don't necessarily believe. Certainly they haven't been my guess.
Yeah.
But I think there are some that maybe aren't legit, and then they all get lumped in with maybe some that are legitimate.
Yeah.
And this is just my opinion. But I think that some of those tend to be a lot scarier. And it's not that, like, I had Howard Storm, who his experience was very scary, but he did, hear the voice telling him to call out. And I almost get the impression, having talked to a huge, number of people now and listened also to even to tens of thousands of these stories elsewhere too, is that everything is meant for our learning.
Yes.
So I don't think it's not that eternal thing that many of us were taught. I do think that some people may not be ready for the light, and they might be the ones that outright reject it. Not so much that the light is rejecting them, but they're like, I'm rejecting it because
Yeah.
I don't feel worthy. And so they may have a negative experience, but I think it's more of a learning opportunity. And I don't think any of that is that they're going to suffer forever. I think it's they need to find their way back. And I think there's probably a lot of pulling,
Yeah.
guidance along the way to get them to come back in. I think everybody ultimately returns to the light, in my opinion.
And that's my opinion too, Heather.
Yeah, yeah,
Now, just listening to lots of stories and doing some thinking on my own, I believe that too. And
yeah.
majority of these experiences are so positive, so beautiful,
Oh,
so filled with light and love and fascinating things. Things that even sometimes I find it hard to believe, and I have to take a pause and I have to think and I have to connect the dots for myself. So none of these stories are very easy to process, which is why I love the way you ask questions and help bring out.
thank you. Thank you
So,
so much. And they aren't, and I have had guests that I have listened more than once. I think Peter Panagore, I listened to his about 4 or 5 times, and I still feel like I need to re-listen to it because it was so complex, so beyond what I could kind of grasp.
yeah.
And I've had I mean, I've had many that I've wanted to go back and listen. And there are things that initially I go, oh, that's interesting, but I wouldn't really think, I wouldn't know for sure. Um, I didn't necessarily accept it yet in my brain, but then you hear more and more, and there's similar things. For example, I'll just say reincarnation. When I first heard it, I thought, well, that's interesting, but they could be mistaken too. And truly, this still is a possibility. We're all one, so
Yeah.
maybe we're seeing somebody else's life.
Mhm.
I don't even really know the answer, but I'm also now much more open to that being something that we go through, because I've heard so many near-death experiencers that are convinced that we do reincarnate. So that really is an evolution of something from even when I started my podcast that I had a lot more uncertainty about. And now I'm, you know, kind of leaning much more in that direction.
Yes, and with that thought, you actually have led me right into my question
Oh,
because
okay.
I was going to ask you if you've
Mhm.
transformed how you think about life and death from your podcast, just from talking to all these people. So,
Yeah.
so that's yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and in a couple ways. One, I'll say in general, before I even started my podcast, I had been reading and listening to so many of these stories. And I found they personally transformed me into wanting to be a better person, into
Mhm,
wanting to be kinder, and to just strive to be more loving. So I would say everybody, you know,
mhm,
that hears these, I think it's a bit of a transformation. This is what I believe. And so the more you listen to them, I think the more it benefits us. The other thing, though, that I've learned, and as I've interviewed people, is I often keep saying this is my opinion or this is what I believe, because my beliefs are a lot more fluid now.
mhm,
Yeah, I think many of us grow up and we believe a certain thing and we stay there. But the more I listen to these, the more I realize there is so much that we do not understand. I
mhm,
mean, we know this little tiny bit of all of this infinite
mhm,
um, place, this infinite being, this infinite world beyond this one, infinite dimensions. There's just so much that we can't even grasp. And so that's the other thing I've learned. I do love learning and I love finding out what I can learn, but I also know there is so much beyond what my human brain will ever be able to take in. And it's exciting to think about just how fascinating it is and how much, how it's so beyond in terms of being amazing and wonderful that we can experience or that we will someday experience. And you said something earlier too, which I think is so true as well. That we are so much more powerful than we realize.
mhm.
And I believe it was Wayne Dyer, and I think probably many others that have said, if you knew who walked beside you in this life that you have chosen, you would never experience fear or doubt again. And I do think that we don't realize how connected we are
Mhm.
to God, to source, to all these beings that are trying to help us
Mhm.
and guide us, that we can call upon for help. So it is fascinating to think, what it's all about, and it's exciting. And we keep getting these little nuggets, or I often say we get a little piece of the puzzle, of a huge, huge puzzle. And as we keep putting pieces together, we get a little bit more of the picture, but there's still so much that we have yet to learn.
That we have yet to learn.
Yeah.
That's the key. I don't remember who it was, but it was somebody's ND that I was listening, and they
Mhm.
came back. They said when they were on the other side, they felt like somebody had hooked them up to this giant bottle of IV that was like knowledge. But when
Yeah.
they came back, they couldn't even describe it with the human words because we cannot.
Right. And so many of them say that they knew so much, but they weren't. able to take it back, but and a lot of that is, well, sometimes it was they weren't supposed to bring that knowledge back to here on earth,
Mhm.
but sometimes it also was that their brains weren't able to understand things that were so clear and so obvious there. It's kind of like if you're taking a college course and you find it really interesting and you're grasping all this stuff. Well, you can't put a kindergartner in that college course and have them have any clue about what's going on. And, we are at that toddler stage where, we just can't understand it. Um, but it's fun to understand what we can or to
Yes.
try. And then keep fluid with our beliefs, realize that we're going to keep learning, hopefully. And with that, what we know and believe will keep expanding.
Yeah. And you also touched on something very important, Heather. It's a
Yeah.
concept that I certainly is very close to my heart, and that's that
Hmm.
we are supported, we are guided, we are loved. And,
Yes.
anybody listening to these NDE stories cannot walk away not believing the fact that we're never alone.
And sometimes we feel very alone. And at those times, it's really hard
Mhm.
to believe that there is somebody there guiding us. And it's okay to yell, I think, even at God and say, why aren't you helping me? Why aren't you here? Because that just shows the passion.
Mhm.
And I think it was Howard Storm that was saying basically, if you're yelling at God, at least he knows that you care and you're connected versus just, not being interested at all.
Yeah.
And and I think when we are alone, we have to keep reminding ourselves, or I should say, when we feel alone, we have to keep reminding ourselves that we are not alone, that there is always guidance around us. Now, I say this and I believe it's true, but there will come a day that I'll be having a lot of crap coming down and I will feel very alone and I will be wondering, where is somebody? And so that's a natural human thing. Even when we believe things, it sometimes is hard for us to always bring that into our life because we have so many human circumstances that can throw that off.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of my guests described it like changing a channel.
Okay.
Sometimes we're tuned in, and sometimes things take so much of our bandwidth, we're just tuned out. And that's when we
Yes.
feel alone.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
very,
Yeah.
very important point.
Yeah.
And all of the NDE stories, each one that I hear becomes my favorite. So this next question is not fair, but I'm gonna
Hmm.
ask it.
Yeah.
Are there any that have stood out to you that have touched you like personally?
Yes, there are a lot that I love. I love so many of them, and for different reasons. I mentioned Peter Panagore. I really enjoy him. I enjoy him as a person, and I enjoy the depth of what he talked about because it's beyond what I can even grasp. That's not for newbies at all. That's for somebody who's heard a lot of near-death experiences already. But Vinnie Tolman and Howard Storm have both been um, really incredible guests. And and Howard Storm is wonderful. He had been an atheist after his experience. He became a Methodist pastor. And what I love about Howard is he says, you don't have to agree with everything I say. He said, I don't even want you to. I just want you, to hear this is what I went through and this is what I believe. And I love that he is so open-minded about that. And I really respect his opinion because he comes from I was raised as a Lutheran, and so that we have that common background. But when I've asked him, what he asked God, I was asking about that, is that he asked God, what is the best religion? He actually asked Jesus, and he said, whatever religion brings you closest to
Wow.
God. And I just thought that was so profound, because we all love people that, don't believe as we believe.
Mhm.
Um, I mentioned Vinnie Tolman. He not only has an incredible, incredible story, um, but I took time to have him also talk about some other things because there's so much to his story that you can't even fit it in a 1 hour podcast. And so I had him back because he had briefly mentioned things that he had seen in the future. And so then brought him back, and I've got 3 different episodes of talking all about things that he is expecting for the future. And that is super fascinating. Another guest that I just had on that really blew me away was James Getch. And he saw basically all of human history and human future. And he saw it all in this tapestry. But when he's zoomed into this tapestry, it was we were all individual threads. It's a very complex, but also fascinating. And I say complex, but I found it very easy to understand as he was able to describe it. And so he's somebody that has stuck out to me. But there's just so many. I feel like I've been so blessed. Another guest, Mary Helen, is so entertaining. Um, she's great, Mary Helen Hensley. Um, eh, so I mean, I could go on and on because
Yeah.
there's so many great ones.
Mhm.
And if you're like me, you just enjoy, watching a bunch. And I've got a huge playlist, and they're almost all on near-death experiences. There's a couple that are spiritually transformative experiences, but you can just start from the beginning and listen to them. And there's so many fascinating guests that I have on there. So it's been a treat, and they're all people that have been transformed.
Yes.
They're really nice people.
Mhm.
They're genuine people, and that's what I love about interviewing people. And you probably find it too with near death experiencers. They're just so kind.
Yes.
They've been touched by the other side, and they bring that down with them on earth here. And I love that about them. They're just really beautiful people.
They are, Heather. And humility is definitely something like they are just exuding that all the
Yeah,
time. And I
yeah,
have to confess, Vinnie Tolman's interview with you, that's
yeah,
the one I was hooked on. I think I watched and like because that's the one I really needed to like listen again.
yeah.
'Cause that was one where I thought, wow. I was just
Wow.
wow,
It was
yeah.
a wow. I mean, I have 7 episodes with him. The
Mhm.
first four are basically him telling his experience, which was wild. I mean, there was so much to his story. If you want to hear a detailed story,
Yeah.
um, Vinnie Tolman is great. And and then when I had him back with those other 3 episodes about the future, it was just like,
Yeah.
I mean,
That's the one I was hooked
it's
on.
kind of mind blowing. Yeah,
Yes, it is.
yeah,
Well, thank you for sharing those, really, because there is so much to learn from every story.
yeah.
Sometimes I find myself going back and re-listening or re-watching a guest that I've already interviewed.
Yes,
And I always find I'm learning a new thing every time I'm listening because we're just paying
yes,
attention differently each time.
yes. I so agree. And then also when you learn more, because say you listen to them and then you listen to several other guests after them, when you go back, you realize, oh, I kind of missed that when they said that, but now it's really clicking because I heard 3 other people mention
Yeah.
something like
Yeah.
that. And so now it's standing out a bit more to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, because some of these stories are so fascinating,
Mhm.
what kind of responses do you get from your audience?
I get mainly very positive, wonderful messages. People, I think that these are really helping a lot of people. Your
Mhm.
podcast, my podcast, hopefully other podcasts, because there are a lot of people that are hurting, and some of them have lost somebody they love. And it's so
Mhm.
reassuring for them to hear these stories, and it's very uplifting. Other people just have a natural curiosity and they love them, and they write very uplifting and kind things in the comments.
Mhm.
And then the other thing I get, and it's a much, 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 much smaller percentage, is people that have a very strong opinion on what is right and what is wrong. And they will come in and they will say, very negative things.
Mhm.
And, that is something that, I've said, share your thoughts. So they're sharing their thoughts. And so I respect that. Um, I always want people to do it with kindness. And, I certainly don't like it when people are unkind, which happens sometimes. But the vast majority of people are really wonderful. And even I think just in seeing how I respond, and that I found even some that were started out initially, they would comment and say not so great things. They've softened it a bit. And so that's kind of nice to see that they're even changing. And it's not even so much, I th think, in hearing it, it's just that I think that I hope to respond in the way that is reflective of what I'm learning from near-death experiences.
And I
And
think this is important, Heather, because when I
yeah,
first started listening to the
mhm,
near-death stories, it was a very mixed response from my own self, right? Like
yeah,
I was so comforted by all the love, the light, all the good
hmm,
stuff.
yeah,
But then I would start getting some anxiety about when I would hear people talking about life reviews or distressing NDEs.
yeah,
So it's taken me 8 years, 8 years of constantly listening to these stories, reading books,
yeah,
trying to connect the dots. And now I'm at a place where I feel very happy whenever I'm listening to an NDE,
yeah,
and I'm usually able to process it quickly. But what I feel like with your podcast and you being so engaged in the comments, I've noticed that I
hmm,
think it helps create a community where people can together process what's coming up for them when they're listening,
yes.
to these stories. So thank you for that work that you're doing.
You're welcome. And I'll tell everybody listening here to Puja is make sure to like and comment because it does make a difference
Yeah.
to our podcasts. And so, do that, share a comment every time you watch Puja and her guests because hey, it is very helpful. Um, but I do try to engage. I've actually reply to almost everybody. Now, I will say there are times when I get really busy. For example, my daughter got married recently and I had lots of guests in town. I was busy. And there were some people that it took me a month to get back to their comment. But I do reply pretty much to all of them. There have been a couple that were especially nasty and then I maybe ignored them. But it's very rare that I would do that.
Yeah.
So it's been fun. I've really learned a lot from my audience. They're very uplifting, as I said, and I really enjoy connecting with people. I feel like I've gotten to know some of the people because they comment on a regular basis.
Mhm.
And so that's fun when I start to recognize the name. I might not, it might take me a few times of somebody commenting, but after a bit, I go, oh, okay, I know this person, and you do form a connection that way too. So I do think it's a really nice way to expand, my community of people um, to learn from them and to grow from them and to be touched by them too, because a lot of them have some very touching stories. Um, that there are people struggle through life. There are a lot of challenges that we all face, and hopefully, as we see that, it gives us more empathy for other people because we don't always know what everybody's going through.
That's true. That's true. And while I was listening to you,
Mhm.
this I wasn't planning on asking this question, but it
Yeah.
literally just popped in my
Yeah.
head.
Okay.
So feel free to say no.
Okay.
But speaking of audiences and comments and things,
Yes.
I have seen some comments on different platforms where people
Yep.
say, "Well, it's so beautiful on the other side, and life is so hard here. So
Yeah.
why be here? Why don't we just check up?" Right? Like when
Mhm.
people are going through a really hard, challenging time and they're listening to all these beautiful things on the other side.
Yeah.
And so, what would you say to someone that's maybe thinking like that? You know?
What I say, and I have said it, is that because you are here, you have a purpose. You would not be here if you didn't have a purpose. And it really isn't up to us to interrupt that purpose.
Mhm.
Um, just looking at it from, what I've learned from near-death experiences too is, if you don't finish it now, you're going to have to still learn that lesson and you might have to start all over. So, you know, be here, embrace it. And I'm not saying it's not hard because people do have
Mhm.
really hard lives and it can be heartbreaking to know some of the things that people suffer with and they have to go through. And I get it. I can see where they do not want to be here. But I do think that there is a purpose. There's a purpose in all of us being here, or we wouldn't be here if there
Mhm.
wasn't.
Yeah.
And I think it's not a decision. we don't always know the bigger picture. And so that's why to make a decision like that, we don't really understand um, that it may not be the right decision.
Yes.
It,
I,
um, just
yeah,
get it over with, rip off the Band-Aid, go through it now.
yes, don't have to come back and
You know,
relive those
yeah,
experiences around
exactly. And
us.
because if
Yeah,
it's true that we, do live again, we do have, there is reincarnation. Yeah, you're going to go through the same thing, but you're going to
yeah,
start from scratch. You're going to start from the beginning. So,
yeah.
yeah, you're halfway through. Keep it going.
Yes. That's great. That's
Yeah.
great, Heather. Thank you. And that
Yeah.
actually brings us to a close. But before we close,
Yeah.
how is the best way that people can reach you, connect with you? I know your podcast. I'm going to share that link in my show
Yeah.
notes. And is there a social media platform that you prefer to be connected?
I always tell people I do social media, but that is more to draw people to my channel. So I'm on Instagram and I'm on
Okay.
um, Facebook and I'm on TikTok, but and Threads, but and X. But I always say those really are drawing people to my channel. That's where I'm hoping people will go, which is Beyond with Heather Tesch. And I would just appreciate it. People want to check it out. That is great. It would be wonderful to have them do that. And then do let me know what you think. And it's also I listen to my viewers. I've had viewers make suggestions or, suggest a certain question or a certain guest. And I have often followed through on that. And, I often look up people that somebody suggests. And so that's the best way. It's just I love having people come and it's just been wonderful. It's wonderful for you to invite me on here and to be able to just share that with your audience, the people that are watching here.
Thank you, Heather. The pleasure's been all mine. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
you are so welcome.